Nanny discovers mysterious bruises on an innocent baby, but this is just the beginning. Each clue unveils dark secrets of kidnapping and extortion, putting lives at risk. How far will she go to protect the child and expose the truth no one wants to face? The sun cast a warm golden glow over the neatly trimmed lawns of the Carter residence. A two-story house painted in soft beige tones with an inviting front porch adorned by flower pots. It was the kind of house that whispered stability and success to anyone passing by. But to Isabella Carter, a 32-year-old nanny with gentle hazel eyes and soft brown curls that framed her face, the house felt strangely hollow. Isabella had been with the Carter family for 6 months, taking on the care of baby Noah, an 11-month-old with the brightest blue eyes and the sweetest giggle. She had left her small-town roots for a new start in the bustling suburbs, eager to find purpose in her work. Her days were filled with the simple joys of baby giggles, messy feeding sessions, and bedtime lullabies. Noah had become the light of her days, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers, his innocent trust melting her heart. But there was a shadow in the house, an unspoken tension that Isabella couldn't ignore. Richard Carter, the father, was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with a commanding presence. He worked long hours in finance, his tailored suits as sharp as his temper. Evelyn Carter, the mother, was a picture-perfect homemaker, always dressed immaculately, her blonde hair styled to perfection, her smile dazzling but distant. It started subtly, a faint bruise on Noah's arm when she was bathing him. Isabella brushed it off at first. Babies are clumsy, after all. But then there were more. A tiny purple mark on his leg, a reddish bruise on his back. Her heart sank every time she spotted a new one. The explanations from Evelyn were always the same. He's teething and restless, or you know how active he is, but the excuses didn't sit well with Isabella. One rainy afternoon, as she rocked Noah to sleep in the nursery, she overheard raised voices coming from the living room below. Richard's tone was icy, cutting through the usual quiet of the house. "She's too involved," he snapped. "What if she starts asking questions?" Evelyn's reply was muffled, but her hesitation spoke volumes. Isabella's breath caught. Were they talking about her? The following day, while sorting through Noah's laundry, Isabella noticed something odd. A faint smear of red on the inside of one of his onesies. Her hands trembled as she stared at it, her heart pounding. She tried to shake off the growing unease, convincing herself it must have been from food or a spill. But the nagging feeling in her chest refused to go away. Then came the night that changed everything. Evelyn had asked Isabella to stay late while they attended an event. The house was eerily quiet as Isabella prepared a bottle for Noah in the kitchen. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention. A sharp thud followed by muffled sobs. Rushing upstairs, she found Noah sitting in his crib, his face streaked with tears. His tiny body shook as he clung to her. As she cradled him, Isabella's mind raced. Something was wrong in this house, terribly wrong, and while she didn't yet know the full extent of it, her instincts told her one thing. She had to protect this child, no matter the cost. The pristine walls of the Carter home seemed to close in around her, their picture-perfect charm masking secrets that would soon unravel. The morning after the unsettling night, Isabella found herself staring at Noah's crib as he babbled softly, his tiny hand reaching out for a stuffed bear. His innocent smile should have brought her peace, but the lingering unease in her chest was impossible to shake. She replayed the events of the previous night in her mind. The sharp thud, Noah's tears, and the mysterious bruises. Each detail felt like a puzzle piece waiting to fit into a larger, more sinister picture. Determined to find answers, Isabella gently dressed Noah for the day, her hands brushing against another faint bruise on his arm. Her heart clenched, but she forced a warm smile as he giggled at the touch. "We'll figure this out, buddy," she whispered, her voice tinged with both promise and fear. When Evelyn entered the nursery, Isabella mustered the courage to broach the topic. "Mrs. Carter," she began carefully, "I've noticed a few marks on Noah recently. I'm sure it's nothing, but have you seen them?" Evelyn's perfectly curated smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning in full force. "Oh, you know how babies are. she replied with a dismissive wave. Always bumping into things. He's learning to stand, after all. Richard, who had appeared in the doorway unnoticed, chimed in with a sharp tone. Isabella, you're here to take care of him, not to make baseless assumptions. Babies fall, it's natural. Don't overthink it. His piercing gaze lingered on her, daring her to press further. Feeling the weight of their words, Isabella nodded, retreating to the kitchen with Noah. But her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Over the next few days, she started keeping a meticulous journal, documenting every bruise, every mark, every unusual behavior. Each entry felt like a silent rebellion against the suffocating control of the Carters. The tension in the house grew palpable. Richard's glances became colder, and Evelyn's warmth felt increasingly forced. One evening, as Isabella was tidying up after dinner, she overheard another conversation between them. She's too nosy, Richard hissed. We can't let her dig too deep. And what do you suggest we do? Evelyn shot back, her voice trembling. We can't just... Their words were cut short as Richard noticed Isabella in the hallway. His expression darkened, and Evelyn quickly plastered on her usual smile. Isabella, could you finish the dishes, please? We'll take it from here. As she stood at the sink, scrubbing plates with trembling hands, Isabella's resolve hardened. Whatever was happening in this house was more than just negligence. It was deliberate, and she was running out of time to uncover the truth. The air in the Carter household grew heavier with each passing day. Isabella began to feel like an intruder in a perfectly staged play, where every smile was rehearsed, every gesture calculated. The stakes were rising, and so was the danger. But one thing was clear: she couldn't stay silent. The quiet tension in the Carter household escalated into something more sinister the following evening. Isabella had just put Noah to sleep, his tiny breath steady and peaceful, when the sound of Richard's voice cut through the hallway. His tone was sharp, almost confrontational, and Evelyn's responses were barely audible. Curiosity got the better of her, and Isabella stepped closer to the study door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, Richard stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders tense, his jaw clenched in frustration. Evelyn sat on the edge of a leather armchair, wringing her hands nervously. She's a liability, Richard said, his voice low but laced with venom. If she keeps snooping, she'll ruin everything. Evelyn's response was hesitant. She's just a nanny, Richard. What could she possibly know? She's nosy, he snapped. And if she finds out, we can't take that risk. Isabella froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Were they talking about her? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She backed away quietly, retreating to the kitchen where she could process what she had just overheard. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was different. Richard was unusually cheerful, greeting Isabella with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Evelyn seemed distant, her usual warmth replaced by a guarded demeanor. It was as though they were putting on a show for her benefit. That afternoon, Richard approached her while she was feeding Noah. Isabella, he began, his voice smooth but unnervingly firm. Evelyn and I have been discussing some changes. We're considering hiring a second nanny to help out. It's nothing personal, of course. We just think it might be better for Noah to have extra care. His words were polite, but his intent was clear. They wanted her gone. Isabella smiled politely, masking the wave of panic that threatened to consume her. Of course, Mr. Carter. Whatever is best for Noah, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. But she knew better. This wasn't about Noah, it was about silencing her. As days turned into a week, subtle yet deliberate attempts to discredit her began. Evelyn would make veiled comments about Isabella's performance, questioning her memory and reliability. Richard would leave cryptic notes with instructions that contradicted their usual routines, only to chastise her for not following them. The final straw came when Richard confronted her late one evening. Holding up the journal she had been using to document everything, he sneered, "What is this, Isabella? Are you spying on us?" Her stomach dropped. She hadn't realized he had found it. I just wanted to keep track of Noah's routine," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Is that so?" he said, stepping closer. His towering frame loomed over her as he lowered his voice. "Let me make something clear. This is our home, our son, and you are here because we allow it. Don't forget that." The warning was clear, and the threat was palpable. But Isabella's fear only fueled her determination. She clutched the journal tighter, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just protecting Noah anymore. She was protecting the truth. In the shadows of the Carter household, Isabella realized she was up against a calculated and dangerous force. Richard wasn't just the head of the family. He was the architect of a carefully constructed lie. And Evelyn, despite her nervous demeanor, was complicit. Isabella knew she had to tread carefully. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. Not just her job, but her chance to save Noah from whatever dark secret was buried within these walls. The air in the Carter household grew heavier with each passing day. Isabella's once comfortable position as Noah's caregiver now felt like navigating a minefield. Richard's presence was oppressive, and Evelyn's nervous energy only made things worse. But the most pressing weight on her shoulders was the growing evidence that something wasn't right. One morning, as Isabella prepared Noah's breakfast, she noticed a faint bruise on his arm. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but its placement, a crescent shape that resembled a hand grip, sent a chill through her. She glanced over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching and gently ran her fingers over the mark. Noah winced, confirming her worst fears. That evening, she tried to bring up her concerns with Evelyn. They were in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator masking their conversation. "Mrs. Carter," Isabella began hesitantly, "I've noticed a few marks on Noah lately. I just want to make sure he's okay." Evelyn's hand paused mid-motion as she was wiping the counter. Her face remained neutral, but her voice carried an edge. "Children are clumsy, Isabella. He's just a toddler. They fall, they bump into things. It's normal. But the bruises, they look like..." Isabella stopped herself, not wanting to accuse outright. Evelyn turned to face her, her expression hardening. "Are you questioning how we care for our son?" Isabella immediately backed down, sensing the tension rise. "No, of course not. I just worry about him. That's all." That night, Isabella sat in her room, clutching her journal. She flipped through its pages, which were now filled with dates, times, and descriptions of everything she had observed. Each entry painted a clearer picture. The bruises, Noah's sudden fear of loud voices, and the erratic behavior of his parents. But what was she supposed to do? If she went to the authorities without concrete proof, it would be her word against theirs. The Carters were wealthy, influential, and well-respected in their community. Who would believe a nanny over them? The situation took a darker turn a few nights later. Isabella had just put Noah to bed when she heard raised voices coming from the study. Quietly, she crept down the hallway and listened. "Do you think she knows?" Evelyn's voice was shaky. "She's suspicious," Richard replied, his tone sharp. "But it doesn't matter. She's just a nanny. No one's going to take her seriously. What if she talks?" Evelyn asked, her voice rising with panic. "Then we make sure she doesn't," Richard said coldly. Isabella's blood ran cold. She stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. They were talking about her, and it was clear they were prepared to do whatever it took to protect their secret. The next morning, Isabella noticed her journal had been moved from its usual spot. She had hidden it beneath her mattress, but now it was on the desk, its pages slightly crumpled. Her heart sank as she realized someone had found it. Later that day, Richard called her into the living room. He was sitting on the couch, a forced smile on his face, while Evelyn stood by the window, avoiding eye contact. "Isabella," Richard began smoothly, "we've been thinking about Noah's care. We feel it might be best if you took some time off. A little break to rest." Isabella knew what this was. They were trying to push her out, to silence her before she could uncover more. But she kept her composure, nodding politely. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Whatever is best for Noah." As she left the room, her mind raced. She couldn't let them intimidate her into leaving, not when Noah's safety was at stake. Isabella decided to take action. That evening, while the Carters were out at a dinner party, she searched the house for anything that could help her understand what was happening. In Richard's office, she found a locked drawer. Using a bobby pin, she managed to pry it open. Inside, she found a small stack of photographs, pictures of Noah as a baby, but in a different house with people she didn't recognize. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned over one of the photos. Scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting were the words, "Our baby, Noah." These weren't the Carters. The discovery confirmed Isabella's suspicions. Something about Noah's presence in this household was deeply wrong. But before she could process what it all meant, she heard the front door open. Her heart raced as she quickly put the photos back and relocked the drawer. She slipped out of the office just as Richard's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Isabella knew she had to act quickly. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that Noah's life, and her own, was in danger. That night, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on her. The discovery of the photographs had only raised more questions, and her unease was growing by the minute. She sat on her bed, staring at the journal she had carefully tucked under her pillow this time. Her mind buzzed with fragmented thoughts. The next morning, the house seemed quieter than usual. The Carters were unusually polite, but their strained smiles only deepened Isabella's suspicions. Evelyn handed her a shopping list and suggested she take her time at the store. "Consider it a little breather," Evelyn said, her tone syrupy and insincere. Isabella knew this was their way of keeping her out of the house, but she went along with it. She needed time to think, and maybe some space would help her piece everything together. As she walked through the aisles of the store, she couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. A man in a gray hoodie lingered near the canned goods, glancing at her every so often. When she left the store, her unease only grew. The same man seemed to follow her at a distance, disappearing around corners but reappearing just often enough to keep her on edge. She hurried back to the Carter home, her heart pounding. Once inside, Isabella locked the door and double-checked the windows. As she set the groceries on the counter, she noticed a small piece of paper tucked into the bag. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Stop digging. It's for your own good." The warning sent a shiver down her spine, but it also steeled her resolve. Whoever was behind this was scared. Scared enough to try to intimidate her into silence. Later that day, while tidying up Noah's room, Isabella found another unsettling clue. Beneath his crib, she discovered a stuffed animal with a stitched name on its side. Daniel. Confused, she asked Noah about it. "Who's Daniel?" she inquired gently. Noah tilted his head, his tiny fingers clutching the toy. "Mommy said it was my name before." Isabella froze. This wasn't just a case of abuse. It was something far more sinister. That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the photographs she had secretly taken from Richard's office. She held them under the light, studying every detail. One photo in particular stood out, a group picture of a family at a lavish estate. The man and woman were holding a baby that looked eerily like Noah. On the back of the photo, Isabella noticed faint initials. DC. She quickly jotted them down in her journal, determined to figure out what they meant. The following day, while cleaning the living room, Isabella overheard a phone conversation. Richard's voice carried from his study, sharp and curt. "No, we can't delay any longer. If she finds out, everything falls apart." Evelyn's voice joined his, softer but filled with tension. What if she already knows? The foreshadowing of danger loomed heavily over Isabella. The threats, the photos, the strange name stitched onto the stuffed animal. Everything pointed to a hidden truth that could destroy the illusion of the Carters' perfect family. Isabella realized she had reached a point of no return. The deeper she dug, the more perilous her situation became. But she couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that time was running out. For her, for Noah, and for the truth. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows on the floor as Isabella prepared Noah's breakfast. Her mind raced with the discoveries she had made. She needed someone to confide in, someone who could help her make sense of it all. Later that day, Isabella visited the local park with Noah. She scanned the familiar faces of nannies and parents but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As she settled on a bench, a friendly voice broke her concentration. "Long day?" asked Lisa, another nanny Isabella had befriended in the neighborhood. Lisa, a cheerful woman in her mid-30s, had a sharp eye and a knack for noticing details others missed. Isabella hesitated, then nodded. "It's been eventful." Lisa tilted her head, her smile fading. "Something's bothering you, I can tell." After a moment's pause, Isabella decided to confide in Lisa, carefully omitting the most alarming details. "Have you ever felt like something isn't quite right with the family you work for? Like they're hiding something?" Lisa frowned, her cheerful demeanor giving way to concern. "Once or twice." "Why? Are you saying something's off with the Carters?" Before Isabella could respond, a black car pulled up nearby, its tinted windows glinting in the sun. A man in a gray hoodie stepped out, scanning the park. Isabella's heart sank. She recognized him from the grocery store. "Is everything okay?" Lisa asked, noticing Isabella's pale expression. "I'm not sure," Isabella whispered, "but I think I need your help." Lisa leaned closer. "What's going on? You can trust me." Isabella took a deep breath and recounted the strange events. The bruises on Noah, the threatening note, the photographs, and the stuffed animal with the stitched name. Lisa listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "This sounds serious," Lisa said. "You can't keep this to yourself. Have you thought about going to the police?" Isabella shook her head. "I don't have enough evidence yet. And if I'm wrong..." She trailed off, glancing at Noah playing nearby. Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Isabella's shoulder. "You're not wrong. Your instincts are telling you something for a reason. But you have to be careful. If they're hiding something this big, they won't let you uncover it without a fight." As the man in the hoodie lingered near the playground, Isabella's unease deepened. She knew she couldn't face this alone. Lisa offered to help by keeping an eye on Noah at the park while Isabella investigated further. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you," Lisa said firmly. "Just promise me you'll stay safe." As they parted ways, Isabella felt a small surge of hope. For the first time in days, she wasn't entirely alone. But the presence of the mysterious man served as a chilling reminder. Someone was watching her, and time was running out. As the evening descended, Isabella's unease only deepened. The cozy warmth of the Carter home now felt stifling, the shadows in the corners too dark, and every creak of the floorboards too loud. She tried to focus on Noah, now peacefully asleep in his crib, but her mind refused to quiet. The photographs, the bruises, the man at the park. It all added up to a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Unable to sleep, Isabella crept into the living room. She turned off the lights, allowing the moonlight to cast faint silver streaks across the room. From her pocket, she pulled out the tiny stuffed animal she had found earlier. Noah was still stitched into its faded fabric. Turning it over in her hands, she felt a small lump beneath the seams. With trembling fingers, Isabella carefully pried the stitches apart. Inside, she found a tiny, rolled-up slip of paper. Unfurling it, she read the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Find the truth before it's too late." Her breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a warning and a challenge. But from whom? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise from upstairs. A floorboard creaked, followed by soft footsteps. Her heart pounded in her chest. She quickly hid the stuffed animal and slipped into the shadows of the hallway. Peering up the staircase, she saw a figure moving slowly past Noah's room. It wasn't Mrs. Carter. The silhouette was taller, broader. Mr. Carter? But why was he moving so stealthily? Isabella stayed frozen as the figure paused outside Noah's door, hand hovering over the doorknob. Time seemed to stretch unbearably as she debated whether to act. Just as the figure reached for the door, Noah stirred, letting out a soft cry. The figure withdrew immediately, retreating silently into the master bedroom. Her knees felt weak as she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't know what Mr. Carter's intentions were, but something about the scene chilled her to the core. The next morning, Isabella approached Mrs. Carter cautiously during breakfast. "I heard someone walking around last night," she said casually. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Carter stiffened, her smile faltering for just a second. "Oh, that must have been my husband. He's been restless lately." Isabella nodded but made no further comment. She sensed the tension in Mrs. Carter's voice, as though the question had hit a nerve. As the day progressed, Isabella felt eyes on her wherever she went. Mr. Carter lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, his gaze cold and probing. Mrs. Carter's demeanor grew distant, her polite smiles feeling more like shields. That afternoon, Lisa texted her. "Saw the guy from the park again. Near your block. Be careful." Isabella's hands trembled as she read the message. She glanced toward the living room window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. Across the street, a car idled, its driver obscured by tinted windows. Her instincts screamed that she was in danger, but Noah's safety mattered more than her own. She resolved to confront the Carters soon, but she needed more proof. Late that night, she returned to the family's study, carefully searching through the drawers and files. In the bottom drawer, beneath stacks of tax documents, she found a locked metal box. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, she scanned the desk for a key. Her search was interrupted by a faint sound, the unmistakable hum of footsteps approaching. Panicking, she slid the box back into the drawer and stepped into the nearest closet, holding her breath. Through the slats, she saw Mr. Carter enter the study. He stopped near the desk, his eyes scanning the room as if sensing something was out of place. Isabella clenched her fists, her heart hammering in her chest. She had been right all along, this house held secrets. But would she survive long enough to uncover them? The tension in the Carter household had reached a breaking point. Isabella's every move felt scrutinized, and she knew the walls were closing in. Determined to uncover the truth, she waited until the house was silent, the Carters asleep. With Noah safely tucked in his crib, she slipped back into the study. The locked metal box had haunted her thoughts all day. This time, she was prepared. From her pocket, she pulled a small hairpin, a trick she had learned years ago from a neighbor. Her fingers trembled as she worked the pin into the lock, every small click echoing like thunder in the silent house. Finally, with a soft snap, the lock gave way. Isabella hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. She opened the box slowly, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and an old flash drive. The photographs made her stomach turn. They were of Noah, taken in various places she had never seen before. One image stood out. Noah in a hospital gown, his tiny arms bruised, his face pale. A handwritten note on the back read, "Keep him under control. No one can know." Her pulse raced as she sifted through the documents. Birth certificates, adoption papers, and hospital records, all incomplete or forged. The pieces began to form a horrifying picture. Noah wasn't their child. The flash drive was her last hope for answers. She slipped it into her pocket just as she heard footsteps approaching. The sound was deliberate, steady, and growing louder. She scrambled to return the box to its place, but her shaking hands betrayed her. The study door creaked open. Mr. Carter stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice cold and even. Isabella forced a smile, hiding her trembling hands behind her back. "I was just looking for a book. Thought I'd read to pass the time." His eyes darted to the desk, then back to her. "In the middle of the night? I didn't want to wake anyone," she replied, stepping toward the door. But he didn't move, blocking her path. "You should be careful," he said, his tone darkening. "It's easy to get lost in a house this big." Her heart pounded as she brushed past him, muttering a quick goodnight. She hurried to her room, locking the door behind her. Once inside, she plugged the flash drive into her laptop, desperate to uncover its secrets. The screen lit up with folders labeled Project X and Transaction Logs. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, hesitant to click. Finally, she opened the first folder. What she saw made her blood run cold. emails detailing payments, threats, and plans involving Noah. One message stood out, its subject line reading, "Child acquisition confirmed. Keep hidden." Tears streamed down Isabella's face as the full weight of the situation hit her. Noah hadn't just been taken. He was being used as leverage in a twisted game of power and greed. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered her thoughts. Someone was at her door, pounding relentlessly. "Isabella, open the door," Mr. Carter demanded, his voice seething with anger. She quickly ejected the flash drive and hid it beneath her mattress, her heart racing as she approached the door. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "I think you know," he replied, his tone icy. As she hesitated, the pounding grew louder. She knew she had crossed a line and that her discovery had put her life, and Noah's, in immediate danger. Isabella woke to the harsh rays of the morning sun piercing through her window. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the revelations from the night before. Her body ached with tension, but she knew there was no time to waste. The flash drive hidden beneath her mattress felt like a ticking time bomb. She needed to act. Noah's innocent laughter from the nursery reminded her of what was at stake. Quietly, she packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes, her phone charger, and the flash drive. She tucked it carefully into an inner pocket, vowing to guard it with her life. Downstairs, the Carters were uncharacteristically quiet. Mrs. Carter sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee with a vacant stare, while Mr. Carter paced near the living room window, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. Isabella felt their unease, the tension palpable. "Isabella," Mrs. Carter said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. "We'll be out for most of the day. Make sure Noah sticks to his schedule." "Yes, ma'am," Isabella replied, keeping her tone neutral. She avoided eye contact, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the cloth, but she forced herself to remain composed. As soon as the Carters left, she sprang into action. Noah sat in his high chair, babbling happily as Isabella prepared his favorite snack. She leaned down to meet his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "We're going on an adventure today, buddy. Just you and me." She secured Noah in his car seat and drove toward the edge of town, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Every passing car felt like a potential threat, every glance in her direction a sign she'd been found out. She couldn't shake the memory of Mr. Carter's ominous words the night before. Her first stop was the public library. She needed a secure computer to analyze the flash drive further. She parked in a distant corner of the lot, carrying Noah on her hip as they entered the quiet building. The librarian gave her a kind smile, oblivious to the turmoil boiling beneath Isabella's calm exterior. In a secluded corner, she plugged the flash drive into the library computer. Noah sat beside her, munching on a cracker, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. Isabella navigated through the files cautiously, uncovering more disturbing details. Large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts, coded messages between Mr. Carter and an anonymous contact, and photos of Noah taken in unfamiliar places. Her heart sank when she found a document titled Plan Alpha, Final Phase. It outlined the Carters' intention to demand a ransom from Noah's biological family. The file also included details of the family, names, occupations, and even addresses. Isabella gasped as she read the names. The Prestons, owners of a multinational corporation. "This isn't just a case of abuse," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. "This is a kidnapping." Suddenly, Noah tugged at her sleeve, pulling her from her thoughts. "Up," he said, pointing toward the exit. His simple demand reminded her of the urgency of their situation. As she gathered their things, she caught sight of a man in a dark jacket entering the library. He scanned the room, his gaze sharp and searching. Isabella froze, her instincts screaming danger. Clutching Noah tightly, she slipped out through the side entrance, her heart pounding. Back in the car, she strapped him in and drove away, her mind racing with questions. How deep did this conspiracy go? And how much time did she have before the Carters realized she was missing? Isabella's next move was clear. She needed to contact the Prestons. but doing so meant risking everything, including her life. Isabella parked her car in a quiet suburban street, her hands trembling as she clutched the steering wheel. She had memorized the Prestons' address from the files on the flash drive, but now that she was here, doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if they didn't believe her? What if the Carters had already discredited her somehow? She glanced at Noah, who was sound asleep in his car seat, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. His innocence was a stark contrast to the chaos brewing around them. Summoning her courage, Isabella exited the car and approached the Prestons' grand estate. The house was enormous, surrounded by manicured lawns and a wrought iron gate. A small intercom panel was mounted on the gatepost. She pressed the button, her heart pounding in her chest. A crackling voice answered. "Yes, who is it?" "My name is Isabella," she began, her voice shaking. "I have urgent information about your son." There was a long pause. "Wait there," the voice commanded before cutting off abruptly. Isabella's nerves stretched thin as she waited. Moments later, the gates creaked open, and a security guard stepped out, his expression stern. "Follow me," he said, motioning her to enter. She hesitated, glancing back at Noah in the car. "I need to bring him with me," she said firmly. The guard looked surprised but nodded. "Fine." Quickly, inside the estate, Isabella was led to a lavish sitting room, where a couple sat waiting. The woman, Olivia Preston, was elegant but visibly tired, her eyes red-rimmed as though she had been crying. Her husband, Daniel, had a commanding presence, his jaw clenched with tension. "Who are you?" Olivia demanded, her voice trembling. "I'm Noah's nanny," Isabella said, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. "Or at least that's what I thought until I discovered the truth." "Your son," she paused, her voice breaking. "He's alive. He's been with me this whole time." Olivia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about? Explain yourself." Isabella placed the flash drive on the coffee table. "This has everything. Proof of who Noah is and what the Carters have done. They kidnapped him. They've been using him to extort you." Olivia reached for the drive, her hands trembling. "Where is he? Where's my son?" Isabella turned toward the doorway, where the security guard was bringing Noah inside. The boy looked around curiously, clutching his stuffed animal tightly. Olivia let out a choked sob and rushed to him, scooping him into her arms. "Henry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my sweet boy." For a moment, Isabella felt a surge of relief. She had done it. Noah Henry was finally safe. But the moment was short-lived. Daniel stood, his face dark with anger. "If what you're saying is true, those people will come after us. They won't give up easily." Isabella nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help. We have to act fast." Before Daniel could respond, a commotion erupted outside. The distant sound of tires screeching and muffled shouting reached their ears. Isabella's blood ran cold. "They found us," she whispered. Daniel's expression hardened. "Get upstairs," he ordered Olivia. "Take Henry and lock the door." Olivia hesitated, clutching Henry tightly. "What about you?" "I'll handle this," Daniel said, his voice firm. Isabella followed Olivia toward the staircase, her heart racing as she heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the house. Someone banged on the front door, shouting in a voice she recognized instantly. "Mr. Carter." "You can't hide from us," he bellowed. "We just want the boy. Hand him over and no one gets hurt." Isabella felt her stomach twist with fear. She had underestimated the lengths the Carters would go to. Upstairs, Olivia locked the door and sat with Henry in her lap, her body trembling. "Thank you," Olivia whispered to Isabella, "for bringing him back." "We're not out of this yet," Isabella replied, her voice low but resolute. She positioned herself near the window, peering out at the chaos below. The Carters weren't alone. 2 other men stood with them, their faces grim and determined. Isabella's mind raced. She had to find a way to protect Henry and Olivia while keeping herself out of their clutches. But as the seconds ticked by, the odds seemed increasingly stacked against her. The sound of splintering would echoed through the house as the front door gave way. Isabella flinched at the noise, her mind racing for a plan. Downstairs, Daniel faced the intruders, his voice calm but firm as he tried to stall them. "You've made a mistake," Daniel said, his tone laced with authority. "This is private property. Leave now, or the police will be here within minutes." Mr. Carter stepped forward, a menacing smile spreading across his face. "We both know you're bluffing. You've been running scared for months. Now hand over the boy, and no one gets hurt." Daniel didn't flinch. "You're not getting near my family." Meanwhile, upstairs, Isabella clutched her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. She kept her voice low as she explained the situation, urging the operator to send help immediately. Olivia held Henry close, whispering soothing words into his ear. The boy clung to her, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Isabella felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let these people tear the family apart again. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed up the staircase. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she realized one of the intruders was heading their way. She gestured for Olivia to stay silent and pressed herself against the wall near the door, holding a heavy lamp she'd grabbed for protection. The door rattled as the intruder tried the handle, then banged on the wood. "We know you're in there," the man shouted. Isabella tightened her grip on the lamp, her heart pounding in her chest. As the door began to splinter under the weight of the intruder's kicks, she made a split-second decision. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice trembling but fierce. The door burst open, and the man stepped inside. Isabella swung the lamp with all her strength, catching him off guard. He staggered backward, clutching his head, but quickly recovered, his expression dark with anger. Before he could advance further, Daniel appeared behind him, grabbing the man by the collar and pulling him out of the room. A scuffle ensued in the hallway, the sounds of grunts and crashing furniture filling the air. Isabella took the opportunity to usher Olivia and Henry out of the room. "We need to move," she said urgently. "There's a back staircase. Follow me." The three of them made their way down the narrow staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Isabella's mind raced as she tried to think of a safe place to hide until help arrived. Reaching the kitchen, she spotted the pantry, a small, enclosed space with a lockable door. She motioned for Olivia and Henry to get inside. "Stay here and don't come out until I say so," she instructed. "What about you?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. "I'll distract them," Isabella replied, her eyes blazing with determination. "Just keep Henry safe." Without waiting for a response, she closed the pantry door and turned the lock. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a metal pan from the counter and prepared herself for whatever was coming next. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Mr. Carter standing at the bottom of the main staircase, his face contorted with fury. He spotted her immediately and began advancing. "Where is he?" Carter demanded, his voice a low growl. Isabella stood her ground, her knuckles white around the handle of the pan. "You're not going to touch that boy," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Carter lunged toward her, but before he could reach her, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars filled the windows, and the tension in the room shifted instantly. "Police!" a voice shouted from outside. "Come out with your hands up!" Carter froze, his eyes darting toward the door. He let out a string of curses before signaling to the other intruders. "We're leaving," he barked. As the Carters and their men scrambled to escape, Isabella let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. Moments later, police officers stormed the house, guns drawn, shouting orders for everyone to stand down. Isabella ran back to the pantry, unlocking the door and pulling Olivia and Henry into a tight embrace. "It's over," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now." But deep down, Isabella knew this wasn't the end. The Carters might have been forced to flee, but they wouldn't give up easily. The fight to bring them to justice was only just beginning. The house was still buzzing with the chaos of the earlier confrontation. Police officers moved methodically, taking statements, photographing the scene, and collecting evidence. The once cozy home now felt like a battlefield, each corner carrying the echoes of fear and desperation. Isabella stood near the kitchen counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching as the officers questioned Daniel and Olivia. Henry clung to Isabella's side, his tiny hands gripping the hem of her shirt. His wide, tear-streaked eyes scanned the room, searching for a sense of safety that seemed to elude him. Isabella crouched down, her voice soft and steady. "It's okay, sweetheart. The bad people are gone now," she said, brushing a lock of hair from his face. But deep inside, she wasn't entirely sure of her own words. One of the officers, Detective James Monroe, approached Isabella. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Miss Carter," he began, glancing at his notepad, "we've detained 2 of the intruders, but the others got away. We'll do everything we can to track them down." Isabella nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monroe hesitated before answering, his gaze steady. "It's hard to say. People like them don't give up easily, especially when they think they have something to gain. We'll assign a patrol to keep an eye on the house, but I'd recommend staying somewhere else for the time being." Daniel, overhearing the conversation, stepped forward. "We're not running," he said firmly. "This is our home. We won't let them scare us away." Isabella admired his resolve, but her gut told her it wasn't the safest choice. She turned to Olivia, who looked torn between agreement and fear. "Maybe we should consider it," Isabella suggested gently, "at least until things settle down." As the adults debated their next steps, Henry wandered to the living room, drawn to the soft glow of the television left on during the chaos. A breaking news report caught his attention, and his quiet gasp drew everyone's eyes to the screen. Authorities have confirmed that Richard and Evelyn Carter, the infamous con artists behind a string of high-profile frauds, are now suspects in a violent home invasion, the reporter announced. Images of the Carters flashed on the screen, their faces familiar and cold. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, and Daniel cursed under his breath. Isabella's stomach churned. This wasn't just about Henry anymore. The Carters were dangerous criminals, and their reach likely extended further than any of them had anticipated. Detective Monroe stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "This is bigger than we thought," he admitted. "If they're who I think they are, they won't stop until they get what they want. You're not just dealing with desperate people, you're dealing with professionals." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Isabella's mind raced. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. Henry needed her to be strong. "Detective," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her, "what can we do to protect him? How do we keep him safe?" Monroe regarded her with a mixture of respect and sympathy. "Stick to a routine. Stay in public places as much as possible. And if you notice anything suspicious, call us immediately." As the night wore on, the house quieted, but the tension lingered like an unwelcome guest. Isabella sat by Henry's bed, watching him sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that belied the danger surrounding them. In the stillness, she made a silent vow. No matter what it took, she would keep Henry safe. She would fight for him, even if it meant standing against the darkness that seemed determined to consume them. The night was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that felt too heavy to be natural. The faint hum of crickets and the distant rustle of leaves were the only sounds piercing the oppressive stillness. Isabella sat on the living room couch, her eyes fixed on the front door, her body tense with anticipation. Detective Monroe had left an hour ago, promising to patrol the area, but his departure left the house feeling exposed. Henry was asleep upstairs, his small form curled under a thick blanket. Olivia and Daniel had retreated to their room, but Isabella knew neither of them would sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. Suddenly, a noise outside shattered the silence, a faint but distinct crunch of gravel beneath heavy footsteps. Isabella froze, her breath hitching in her throat. She moved quickly but silently to the window, peering through the curtain into the dark yard. Her heart raced as she spotted two figures creeping toward the house, their silhouettes illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light. Grabbing her phone, Isabella dialed Detective Monroe. The call went to voicemail. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't let fear cloud her judgment. "Daniel, Olivia," she hissed, rushing to the staircase. The couple appeared at the top, their faces pale. "They're here," Isabella whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Stay with Henry. I'll handle this." He descended the stairs, grabbing a baseball bat from the closet. "Wait!" Isabella grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. "You can't face them alone. We need a plan." But before they could decide, the front door handle jiggled, the lock rattling as the intruders tried to force their way in. A sharp bang echoed through the house as the door shook under the pressure. Isabella's instincts kicked in. "Get Henry," she ordered Olivia, who darted upstairs without hesitation. Isabella joined Daniel near the door, her body trembling but her resolve firm. The door burst open, splintering under the force of the intruders. Two men stormed in, their faces masked, their movements calculated. They radiated menace, their eyes scanning the room like predators searching for prey. Daniel stepped forward, bat raised, but the larger of the two men grabbed it mid-swing, twisting it out of his grasp with alarming ease. The second man moved toward Isabella, but she grabbed a nearby lamp, smashing it against his arm. He stumbled back with a grunt, his mask slipping to reveal a cold, scarred face. "Where is he?" The man growled, his voice low and threatening. Isabella's mind raced. She had to buy time. "Who?" she said, feigning confusion. "What do you want?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb. We know he's here. Give us the boy and no one gets hurt." Upstairs, Olivia had barricaded herself and Henry in a closet, holding the trembling child close. She whispered soothing words, trying to keep him calm despite the chaos below. Back in the living room, Daniel lunged at the intruders, but they overpowered him, pinning him to the floor. Isabella's heart pounded as she realized she was out of options. Desperation fueled her next move. "You'll have to kill me first," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She stepped between the men and the staircase, her arms spread wide. "You're not taking him," the scarred man smirked. "That can be arranged," he said, reaching into his jacket. Before he could act, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The men froze, exchanging panicked glances. Isabella had activated the silent alarm installed by Monroe before he left. "Time's up," she said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. The men bolted, fleeing into the night just as the police cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officers swarmed the property, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Isabella collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling from the adrenaline. Daniel sat beside her, his face pale but resolute. Upstairs, Olivia emerged from the closet with Henry, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. Detective Monroe entered the house, his expression grim. "You did good," he told Isabella, "but this isn't over. They'll be back." Isabella nodded, her gaze hardening. "Let them come," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'll be ready." Cliffhanger. As the police processed the scene, Monroe pulled Isabella aside. "There's something you need to know," he said, handing her a file. "We just uncovered the truth about Henry's parents, and it changes everything." Topico 14. Climax e Segunda Reviravolta. Detective Monroe handed Isabella the file, his face etched with gravity. "This changes everything," he said. Isabella hesitated for a moment before opening the file, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents. What she read made her blood run cold. The file contained birth records, photographs, and a police report from 5 years earlier. The truth was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. Henry wasn't the child of Olivia and Daniel. He had been abducted as an infant from a wealthy family, the Brookfields, during a high-profile kidnapping that had dominated the headlines years ago. The file included a picture of Henry as a baby, And even with his chubby cheeks and tiny, curious eyes, the resemblance was undeniable. Isabella's mind raced as she pieced it all together. The bruises, the fear, the constant tension. It all made sense now. Olivia and Daniel weren't abusive parents. They were imposters living in fear of being discovered. "What do we do now?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monroe sighed. "We need to reunite Henry with his real family." But Olivia and Daniel, they won't let him go without a fight. Determined to confront the truth, Isabella joined Monroe in calling Olivia and Daniel to the living room. The couple appeared, their faces pale and drawn. "We know," Monroe began, holding up the file. "Henry isn't your child," Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel's face hardened, and he stepped protectively in front of his wife. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "We love him. We're the only family he knows." "That doesn't justify what you've done," Monroe said firmly. "You kidnapped him, robbed his parents of years with their son. The Brookfields have been searching for him ever since." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. "We didn't kidnap him," she sobbed. We were desperate. His father, he owed us money, and when he couldn't pay, he offered us Henry as collateral. We couldn't leave him there to suffer." The room fell silent, the weight of Olivia's confession hanging in the air. Isabella felt torn. She had seen the love Olivia and Daniel had for Henry, but the facts were undeniable. "We have to do what's right," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Henry deserves to know the truth." Olivia shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "You'll destroy him. We've raised him, loved him, protected him. You can't take him away." Monroe stepped forward. "The Brookfields deserve to know their son is alive. You'll have to answer for your actions, but you can't run from this anymore." As police prepared to take Olivia and Daniel into custody, Henry appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching his stuffed animal. His wide, innocent eyes darted between the adults, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked, his small voice cutting through the chaos. Olivia rushed to him, kneeling and pulling him into a tight embrace. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice breaking. "Everything will be okay." But Henry looked to Isabella, his trust in her evident. "Miss Bella," he asked, his voice trembling. "What's happening?" Isabella knelt to his level, tears in her eyes. "Henry, you're a very special boy," she said gently. "And there are people out there who love you very much, who've been waiting a long time to see you again." Henry's brows furrowed in confusion. "But I love Mommy and Daddy," he said, his gaze darting to Olivia and Daniel. "I know you do," Isabella said, her voice cracking. "And they love you too. But sometimes, doing what's right is the hardest thing to understand." As Henry clung to Olivia, the room filled with the sound of sobs and heavy hearts. Monroe signaled to his officers, who led Olivia and Daniel away, their protests echoing down the hallway. Henry stood frozen, his little face a mixture of fear and heartbreak. Isabella scooped him into her arms, holding him tightly as he cried into her shoulder. She whispered soothing words, promising to stay by his side no matter what. The next morning, Monroe facilitated the meeting with the Brookfields. Isabella held Henry's hand as they approached the grand estate, its towering gates opening to reveal the couple who had never given up hope. Henry's birth mother fell to her knees, overcome with emotion as she saw her son for the first time in years. His father stood behind her, his face a mixture of joy and sorrow. Isabella knelt beside Henry, her hand on his back. "It's okay, Henry," she said softly. "These are your real parents." The boy hesitated before taking a tentative step forward. His mother scooped him into her arms, crying uncontrollably as she held him. His father joined them, the family reuniting in a moment of overwhelming emotion. From a distance, Isabella watched, her heart full of bittersweet pride. She had done the right thing even if it meant breaking her own heart. As the Brookfields turned to thank her, Isabella nodded, knowing her role in Henry's life had come to an end, or so she thought. Cliffhanger. As Isabella prepared to leave, the Brookfields approached her. "Miss Isabella," Henry's father said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We'd like you to stay. Henry needs someone he trusts, and we believe you're the right person to help him adjust." Isabella sat in the ornate guest room of the Brookfields' mansion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The offer to stay as Henry's caretaker echoed in her mind, a mix of honor and uncertainty flooding her heart. While she had grown to love the little boy as her own, the thought of staying in a world so far removed from her simple life felt overwhelming. The room around her, adorned with elegant drapes and intricate furnishings, felt suffocating rather than comforting. She thought of her modest apartment, her quiet routines, and the peace she had always found in the ordinary. Now, everything seemed uncertain, like she had been thrust into a story she wasn't meant to play a part in. "Why did they ask me to stay?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "Am I really what Henry needs?" Her thoughts drifted back to Olivia and Daniel, the couple who had raised Henry for the last 5 years. Despite their deception, Isabella couldn't deny the love she had seen in their eyes. Could she ever truly replace the bond they had built? A wave of guilt swept over her at the thought, her heart aching for Henry's loss and confusion. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her turmoil. When she opened it, Henry stood there, clutching his stuffed animal, his small face etched with uncertainty. "Miss Bella," he murmured, his voice quivering. "Are you leaving?" Kneeling to his level, Isabella placed her hands gently on his shoulders. "Henry," she said, her voice tender yet filled with hesitation, "this is your home now. Your parents love you so much. They've been waiting for you for a very long time. But what about you?" he asked, tears pooling in his wide, innocent eyes. "I don't want you to go." Isabella's heart shattered at his words. She pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as she fought back her own tears. "I'll always care for you, Henry," she whispered, "no matter what." As she held him, Isabella's mind wrestled with conflicting emotions. Staying would mean sacrificing the life she had known, but leaving might mean breaking the trust and comfort Henry so desperately needed. She thought of the countless nights she had soothed his nightmares, the laughter they had shared, and the unspoken bond they had formed. Could she walk away from that? Later that evening, she sat across from Mr. and Mrs. Brookfield in their grand dining room. The couple's gratitude was evident in their eyes, but so was their exhaustion. "We know this is a lot to ask," Mrs. Brookfield began, her voice gentle but firm. "Henry trusts you in a way he doesn't trust anyone else. You've been his anchor through the storm." Mr. Brookfield leaned forward, his expression sincere. "We're prepared to offer you anything you need to make this transition easier. For you and for Henry." Isabella hesitated, the weight of their request pressing heavily on her chest. "I'm just a simple woman," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure I belong in a world like this." Mrs. Brookfield reached across the table, placing a hand over Isabella's. "You belong wherever Henry feels safe," she said softly. "And right now, that's with you." That night, Isabella sat by the window in her room, staring out at the sprawling gardens bathed in moonlight. She thought of the bravery it had taken to expose the truth, the sacrifices Olivia and Daniel had made, and the innocent child at the center of it all. For the first time, she realized that her life had been forever changed, not just by Henry, but by the strength she had discovered within herself. As dawn broke, Isabella made her decision. She stepped out into the hallway, her heart steady and resolute. For Henry, she whispered to herself, heading toward the Brookfield study to give them her answer. The Brookfield study was bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, casting long shadows over the room's rich mahogany furniture. Isabella stood at the door, her hand resting on the frame as she took a deep breath. She had made her decision, and though uncertainty lingered, her resolve was unwavering. As she stepped inside, Mr. and Mrs. Brookfield looked up from their chairs, their expressions a mixture of hope and trepidation. Henry sat on a small armchair near the fireplace, his stuffed animal clutched tightly against his chest. His wide, tearful eyes followed Isabella's every move. "I've made up my mind," Isabella began, her voice steady but warm. She glanced at Henry, her heart swelling with both love and responsibility. "I'll stay, For as long as Henry needs me, the room seemed to exhale all at once. Mrs. Brookfield's shoulders relaxed, her hand flying to her chest in relief. "Oh, Isabella," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You've given us more than we could ever repay." Henry's face lit up with a mixture of joy and disbelief. He leaped from his chair and ran into Isabella's arms, burying his face in her shoulder. "You're not leaving?" he whispered, his voice muffled. "You promise?" She knelt to his level, cradling his face in her hands. "I promise," she said softly, her eyes locking with his. "We're a team, remember?" Mr. Brookfield cleared his throat, his voice filled with sincerity. "Isabella, you're not just an employee. You're family now. Anything you need, anything at all, we're here for you." For the next few weeks, the house was filled with an energy it hadn't known in years. With Isabella's guidance, Henry began to adapt to his new life. Therapy sessions helped him process the trauma of his past, and his laughter slowly returned, echoing through the grand halls of the mansion. Isabella also began to find her place in this new world. The Brookfields, true to their word, ensured she had everything she needed, from additional support for Henry to a comfortable space she could call her own. Still, she remained humble, her focus always on the boy who had come to mean so much to her. The media frenzy surrounding the case began to fade, but not before one final revelation brought closure to the story. The authorities confirmed that Olivia and Daniel, the couple who had raised Henry, had acted out of desperation. They had been coerced into the kidnapping by a criminal organization and had genuinely tried to provide a loving home for the boy. While their actions were unforgivable, Isabella couldn't ignore the complicated emotions she felt toward them. She visited them in custody one last time. The encounter was tense but necessary. "You loved him in your way," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But love doesn't justify what you did. I hope you'll find a way to make peace with your choices." As she left the facility, a weight lifted from her heart. She had done all she could to ensure justice and to protect Henry's future. Back at the mansion, Isabella found herself standing by the large window in the study, watching Henry play in the garden with his newfound friends. The sight filled her with a profound sense of purpose. Though the road ahead would not be without challenges, she knew they would face them together. Isabella embraced her new role as not only Henry's caretaker but also as an advocate for children in need. She began working with local organizations to raise awareness about child safety, her story inspiring others to speak up and take action. As Isabella turned from the window, her phone buzzed with a message from a local journalist requesting an interview. Her journey was far from over, her story had only just begun. Isabella sat on a wooden bench in the Brookfield's sprawling garden, her gaze fixed on Henry as he played under the dappled sunlight. His laughter rang out, clear and joyful, a sound that never failed to bring a smile to her face. In her lap rested a notebook filled with her thoughts, observations, and a growing list of ideas for her new advocacy work. The months since the revelation of Henry's true identity had been transformative for everyone involved. The Brookfields had embraced their role as parents with renewed dedication, guided by Isabella's nurturing influence. The mansion, once an imposing and cold space, now felt alive with warmth and love. For Isabella, the journey had been one of profound self-discovery. When she first arrived at the Brookfield household, she had seen herself as merely a caregiver, a background figure in someone else's story. But now she understood her true impact. She had become a protector, a guide, and a voice for the voiceless. Her thoughts turned to the countless children like Henry, whose stories might never be heard, whose pain might go unnoticed. It was a reality she couldn't ignore. With the Brookfields' encouragement, Isabella began laying the groundwork for a foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and educating caregivers on recognizing signs of abuse. She named it Henry's Light, a tribute to the boy who had changed her life as much as she had changed his. The first event hosted by the foundation was a resounding success. Held in the Brookfields' Grand Ballroom, it brought together influential figures, local families, and advocates for child welfare. Isabella spoke with quiet but firm conviction, sharing her story and emphasizing the importance of vigilance and courage. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring many to take action in their own communities. As she addressed the audience that evening, Isabella's voice carried the weight of her journey, but also the hope she had cultivated along the way. We often believe that we're powerless, that our actions are too small to make a difference, she said, her voice steady. But I've learned that the smallest acts, asking a question, speaking up, offering love, can set off a chain reaction that changes lives. If one person chooses to act, it can be enough to save a life. It was enough to save Henry. Her words hung in the air, followed by thunderous applause. Among the crowd, Henry sat with the Brookfields, his face beaming with pride. As the evening came to a close, Isabella stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The cool night air was a welcome relief after the intensity of the event. She looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. This wasn't the end of her journey. Far from it. But for the first time, Isabella felt ready for whatever lay ahead. She had found her purpose, and she knew she would dedicate the rest of her life to it. As she returned inside, Henry ran to her, his arms outstretched. She scooped him up, his laughter filling the air. In that moment, surrounded by love and a renewed sense of purpose, Isabella knew she had done the right thing. The following morning, the sun rose over the Brookfield estate, casting a golden glow over the world that had been transformed by courage and compassion. Isabella stood on the balcony of her modest guest room, gazing at the vibrant garden below. Henry chased butterflies with an unrestrained joy that made her heart swell with pride. She thought back to the day she first noticed the bruises, tiny marks that carried a weight far greater than their size. What began as a quiet suspicion had blossomed into a journey of bravery and determination, proving that one person's unwavering belief in justice could create ripples far beyond their imagination. Isabella reflected on the transformation within herself. The timid woman who once feared speaking up had become an advocate, a protector, and a guiding force for change. She had not only saved Henry but also illuminated a path for others to follow. As Isabella watched Henry dart through the garden, she whispered a promise to herself. No child will ever go unheard again, not if I can help it. We all have the power to stand up, to listen, and to act. It doesn't take wealth, influence, or status. Just love and courage. Those words would later echo far beyond her modest beginnings. Through her foundation, Henry's Light, Isabella's message reached people across the nation, inspiring others to speak out, protect the vulnerable, and confront the uncomfortable truths that so often go unspoken. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the Brookfields toasted to new beginnings. Henry, clutching a small stuffed bear Isabella had given him, turned to her with a grin. "Miss Isabella, you're my hero." Tears welled in her eyes as she replied, "No, Henry, you're the hero. You gave me the strength to believe in what's right." The camera pans out to show the house bathed in warm light, a symbol of hope restored. The stars above twinkle, as if joining the celebration of lives forever changed by love and bravery. One voice can ignite change. One act of love can save a life. Isabella's courage reminds us that even in the darkest times, a single light can shine brightly enough to guide the way,